Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be here, and it's such an honor to be part of a wonderful panel of speakers, so I really appreciate that. I want to talk about my favorite subject, or one of my most favorite subjects, and that's Europe. I'm here today as a pro-European. I believe in Europe. And as a pro-European, I'm also worried right now, and I constantly find myself asking this question. How can we save the European idea? Now, the European idea is the notion that our continent is better off if we cooperate and work together in unity and peace rather than to work against each other. This notion, this idea of a Europe united, is under attack. It's under attack by xenophobia, under attack by nationalism, under attack by people who start losing trust in the institutions of the European Union. And maybe, of course, we all know Brexit, to just throw another key term out there. So clearly something needs to happen. So what can we do? How can we save this idea? Whatever we try to do and whatever attempt we try to find at finding a solution, we have to keep in mind the very core of Europe and the European idea. And that's European people. That's individuals. That's the citizens of the European Union. That's you and me, all of us. So what about those people? How are they doing? Some people say Europe is like a family, the European family. In a family, you have different family members. You know some of them better than you know others. You relate better with some than with others. You have disagreements. You agree sometimes. But at the end of the day, you're a family. You have a bond. You have a connection. You have common ground. You understand each other. You support each other. And most importantly, at least for me, you trust each other. Trust is a component of an ideal family. Without trust, nothing really works within relationships to each other. When I look at trust, and I think again about Europe, I'm not sure anymore if the concept of family is so applicable to Europe that we see today. In Europe, I see cooperation. I see countries working together because they have common interests, but I'm not sure if they really trust each other. Do all the member states of the European Union trust each other? I don't think so. So maybe a model that is more applicable to what Europe looks like today is not so much a family, but rather a neighborhood. In a neighborhood, you have individual members living in close proximity with each other. And all of these people in this neighborhood have a common interest. They want to keep their streets clean. They want to make sure it's safe, there is no crime. They want to make sure their kids can go to a good school. But by and large, most members of a neighborhood don't really know each other that well. They don't really support and understand each other well. You know some neighbors, but you don't know all of them. And there isn't that much trust between most members of this community. So we have the family and we have the neighborhood. Two different models or two different concepts. Which one would we rather have for Europe to be? Would we rather have Europe be like a family, full of trust and understanding? Or do we say maybe Europe is better as a neighborhood, a little disconnected, less trust, less support? I, for one, know what I would choose. I would choose the family, hands down, no question. So how can we get from something that feels like a neighborhood today to something more of a family? I believe the key component in that development, that process, is a sense of personal connection. Personal connections is when you talk with somebody. It's when you listen to somebody, when you share ideas, and when you start to get where the other person is coming from. A personal connection is not theory, it's experience. It's what you have with somebody else. You need to develop this. And I believe this is the first key component we need to turning Europe from something of a neighborhood into something of a family. We need to make sure that Europeans get to have these personal connections, these personal interactions with individuals of a different cultural or national background. How are we doing in this regard? How are Europeans doing in terms of connecting with other Europeans? We can look at a few statistics to get an answer. The first one. Per year, only 1 out of 3 EU citizens is able or is enabled to travel to a country that is not his or her country of residence. That means only 1 in 3 gets to spend at least one night in a country that is not their home. So that leaves 2 Europeans or EU citizens who do not get to go abroad each year. When you ask those two why they don't go abroad, they will tell you it's for financial reasons. They cannot afford it. Another statistic, less than 1 out of 20 young EU citizens gets to participate in Erasmus or Erasmus+. Erasmus is a wonderful program. This is the big exchange network of the European Union and arguably one of its biggest integrative successes. Yet, less than 1 out of 20 young people actually gets to participate in it. Last statistic, only about 1 in 500 EU citizens moves to a different country every year. I was surprised when I read that statistic, because we have heard so much about the freedom of travel and the freedom of movement. You can work and live in any EU country as an EU citizen. Yet only 1 in 500 people per year actually do this. Clearly, there's some room for improvement. These numbers show us that the sense of a family in Europe that is built on connections, that needs to have this personal interaction, is only open right now to a select few, a minority of EU citizens. The majority does not get to explore Europe, to experience it, and to make these personal connections that are so vital in interconnecting a society, interconnecting a continent. When I see those numbers, I also realize one thing. I am privileged. Privilege comes in many forms. For me, I'm a man, I'm white, I'm straight, I'm German. I come from a family where almost all my close family relatives have university degrees. None of this is my credit. I have done absolutely nothing for any of this. Yet this privilege enables me to have opportunities and to do things that other people do not have. And as a result, I have traveled to 26 European countries, EU and non-EU countries. I have lived 4 years in a country that is not my home country. I have worked in other countries. These opportunities a lot of people do not get. One of the biggest privileges I had, or one of the biggest opportunities that came with my privilege, was a pan-European research trip I did 3 years ago. Here you see a map. Together with a colleague, I was tasked in traveling to 14 European, EU, and non-EU countries and interviewing young people on the ground about their perspectives on life, their hopes and fears, their dreams, their ideas on Europe. We conducted this trip, or we traveled mostly by using Interrail. Interrail is a ticket that you can buy and that allows you to use most trains in most European countries for up to 30 days. So we went on the road. And as you can imagine, such a trip is mostly and first and foremost coined by personal experiences and personal encounters. Let me tell you about some of those encounters. In Italy, we met a young law student. You see her in the middle here. This was in Naples, and she studied law. And she was so excited to study, but she was even more excited to finish her degree and to get to work. She wanted to work as a lawyer to help rid her city, Naples, of corruption, nepotism. It was wonderful talking with her, seeing the fire she had for this subject, and doing something for her city and for her country. Another experience, in France, we were invited by young people who we had met that very same day. We had connected on the street. They said, please come by, let's have dinner together. We went to their place. We had dinner and we talked for most of the night about politics, about Europe, about life. We connected. We also went to Kiev. This was just a few weeks after the European, or the pro-European revolution in Kiev in Ukraine. We were welcomed there by local activists, very young people in their early 20s. They took us to Euromaidan, that's the big square where the revolution against the Yanukovych regime happened. And they showed us around, and they showed us where they personally stood when the revolution happened, where they stood when the government forces killed protesters. These protesters, just to keep that in mind, mostly went there because they wanted to be a stronger part of Europe. Last experience I want to share here, I'm in the harbor of Athens, and I'm talking to young carpenters and young car mechanics. About half of them were unemployed. And they told me how afraid they were that they would never find a good job again, and that this would mean they couldn't participate in Europe because their economic situation would be so dire. All of these meetings, these encounters I had, were meaningful for me because they were personal. They were not theory. This was not something I heard from somebody else. This was something I encountered. I talked with them. I had a connection. And all of these connections together really reshaped how I viewed Europe. It helped me to better understand Europe. I had always been a pro-European, but only this trip really showed me what Europe could be like, that it's about the people and that we all have something in common. During one of the last stops of our trip, we came through Vienna, and we had dinner with another friend. The three of us were sitting down, and we talked about the power of traveling. We talked about how this trip had changed my life, how it turned me from a European theory to a European out of experience, how it turned something from a neighborhood into something of a family with connection and trust. And a very simple question came up. Why couldn't all young people get to have this experience that I just did? Because of my privilege, I did. But why couldn't all do that? Why couldn't all young Europeans take an interrail trip to travel Europe, to explore it, to experience it, and to make personal connections with others? Why couldn't the European Commission give out these interrail tickets for every EU citizen when they turn 18? It was just a simple question. That's the beginning of what we call free interrail. This idea really seeks to do one thing. Do you remember the number we had earlier, the 1 in 3 traveling abroad each year? It seeks to raise that number to 3 in 3, at least once for every person in their lives, so that every person gets a shot in exploring Europe, in making personal connections with people they would otherwise never meet, and that will help all of us to build a sense of a family where we have understanding because we have this connection, we know each other. The idea how this could work is simple. When it's your 18th birthday, you receive a letter from the European Commission. This letter contains a congratulatory note, and it also contains a voucher for an interrail pass. And you don't have to go right away, because a lot of people don't want to go maybe when they're 18, or they still want to save up money, or they want to find friends who they want to travel with. So they have 6 years' time to validate this voucher. And once they decide, it's my time, now I will discover Europe, they go to a train station, they go online, and they exchange this voucher for an actual interrail pass that will allow them to travel the continent for up to 30 days. Go with me on a slight little journey here. Imagine what a Europe could look like where this was implemented. Imagine a Europe in which free interrail was part of daily lives of people. In this kind of Europe, it would be perfectly expected and totally normal for all EU citizens to receive this letter and this voucher when they turn 18. This, of course, means that are already young EU citizens at the age of 13 or 14, they're already excited for their letter when they turn 18. They already start planning. They think about what countries they want to go to, because they've heard all these great stories from their older siblings, from their friends, and maybe from online. So they can't wait to go. And of course, an interrail ticket is not all you need to travel. There are other expenses. We know that. That's why, luckily, civil society is on board with this. Foundations, youth organizations, social workers, NGOs, they're supporting this effort. They give out scholarships or stipends to young people who have less financial means. They provide informational networks in European cities to help young interrailers find their way around in their city. Couchsurfing has boomed. And it enables all EU citizens, no matter what their parents make, no matter where they come from, what language they speak, or which school they have gone to travel Europe. In this kind of Europe, youth mobility will have increased 10 times to what it was before free interrail was introduced. As a result of this strongly increased mobility, we have increased tourism. This is helping to stabilize faltering European economies. It brings in fresh finances, it stabilizes economies, and helps to combat unemployment and youth unemployment in Europe. Most importantly, free interrail, or the interrail network, has been expanded at this point to also include buses and ferries to even reach the most remote corners of our continent. And all of that, of course, is a much greener way of traveling than flying. And because now so many young people do rail, bus, and ferry, our overall CO2 emissions in Europe have decreased, making this continent more green and more beautiful. The most important component, however, is that in this kind of Europe, everybody gets to have these personal experiences and these personal encounters, and it pays off. When millions of people every year travel to other countries, make friends, connect with others. It will have an effect on society at large, within a country, but also on European society. People will grow together. And as a result, in this kind of Europe, nationalism, xenophobia, stereotypes have declined. Their power is less strong now that people actually know each other. In this kind of Europe, a sense of a family is starting to emerge because people have connections with each other. And you can ask anybody on the street, where did you go for Interrail? And they will tell you a wonderful story full of adventure and experiences that has changed their lives. To come back to our opening question, how can we save the European idea? I have a very simple proposal. Send all youth traveling. This is not even that difficult. We just have to do it. The Interrail network exists. We can just do it. It works. There's not much work involved. We just have to convince policymakers that this is something our continent needs. That's why I want to invite all of you to join the Free Interrail movement and to do this convincing, because our continent needs it. And if we do this together, we can grow a continent into a more united family for all. Thank you so much.